What's up, YouTube? Let's talk about some shooting stuff. So you guys just saw me shoot a drill 2 different ways, and there was almost a 1.5-second difference in between the two. And I think a lot of the time people would go like, that's the really fast one. But in reality, the really fast one was the one that sounded slower than the other one because of 2 different things, transitions and movement. So the first one, I basically stood static, tried to pull the trigger really quickly, and then run really, really hard around the barrels, pulled the trigger quickly again. The second one, I basically tried to focus on getting off the target as fast as possible in my transitions and move my feet throughout the entire time. The second one was actually the significantly faster one. And if you think about it, basically shooting these 2 targets twice, so 4 different targets more or less. So in 4 different targets, I gained a 1.5 seconds by just focusing on transitions and movement. I think there's a massive lesson to be learned here, because I think a lot of the time people focus really, really hard on like, I'm gonna go out and split the gun as hard as possible. I'm gonna go from a 15 split today to a 12 split. And it's like, if you think about the math there, when you're only gaining, 0.03 of a second versus gaining tenths or even full seconds on just this tiny array, man, it's a huge difference. And if you take into account, this array being super tiny with only 4 targets, if you did that same exact thing on, say, a 30 target array, think about the time savings difference that you would have in comparison to the guys that shot as fast as possible and ran really hard but weren't doing anything in between the arrays, right? The guy that is doing the work in between the arrays or collecting points in between the arrays while he's moving, it's like that's typically the guys that are going to be at the top, usually, right? So I've been setting this drill up in classes, and I wanted to go over it with you guys because I feel like it's a really easy drill to set up for most folks to go out and practice this one specific skill or 2 specific skills, right? So the way it's going to work is you'll get a barrel stack. If you don't have a barrel stack, you could just take a target stand, staple up a target really high, just so it acts as a barricade. You'll take 2 open targets. These targets are spaced about, I don't know, 1 yard to 1.5 yards apart, and I've got them right at about 7 yards. You can play with the distances here. They don't have to be at 7. You can move them closer. You can move them further away. I oftentimes think that there's definitely some value in playing with the distance, especially for those of you guys that are pretty good. Putting them at 15 to 20 yards, things like that, learning how to move on open targets at those distances, really, really good things to figure out. Sorry, getting over a cold. So that's what you guys will need: barrel stack, 2 open targets. Now, on the beep, try touching the gun before you start moving your feet, because if you do something like, start moving your feet and then the gun moves and it's in a different spot, it's like the draw may not be as consistent as it possibly could. So I try to prioritize getting my hands on the gun first and then starting to move my feet. If I can get my hands on the gun first and get the exact grip that I want with the same pressures, etc., like it's gonna be pretty magical, right? At least that's how it feels anyway. So on the beep, touch the gun. As soon as the gun comes out, all you're gonna wanna do is just start shooting and moving around these barrels, right? Now, things to consider about the movement piece, because I see this come up pretty often. When you guys step, try not to step really, really hard, right? Like if you move like a 10-month-old baby learning how to walk, it's like the gun just bounces throughout the entire time. Things that help me with shooting on the move is thinking about like lowering my whole entire center of gravity and bending my knees. With the knees bent, it's really, really easy to make the gun just, track flat and not bounce around. And I think it's just because with the knees being bent, it kind of takes up some of the shock, so to speak, when you set your feet down. It allows you to set your feet down a little bit softer than you could if your legs were completely straight, right? So bending the knees, really, really good idea. Next thing that I try to conceptualize with shooting on the move is keeping or trying to keep my body centered over the top of my feet. I don't want to be, in one direction or another. I find that, if I do something like this or do, some sort of weird off balance movement, it's like, it just adds risk to the shooting piece. So the more centered I can keep my body over top of my feet, like the easier it is to shoot on the move. All right. So we'll go ahead and demo this for you guys again, and then show you guys the hits. I'll run it a couple different times from each side or whatever. All right, there's a 331. Okay, 298. A couple more times. Very good. All the hits pretty centered up. There's a couple Charlies on there, but that's not something I worry too much about in training. That was a 302, so decent times. All right, that was a 310. So as you can see, it's like I'm not really shooting super duper aggressive where I'm like trying to split the gun super hard or anything like that, right? I'm shooting almost at what I would just call a comfortable pace and just moving my feet throughout the entire time, just focusing on snappy transitions to the center of each target. So go give this drill a shot, and I think it would help you guys out just focusing on this stuff as well as shooting fast. So if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them below.